We are just beginning to see how expensive adapting to a new climate will be. The Bureau of Indian Affairs has awarded $25 million for 3 communities working on their move to higher ground. In addition to Quinault, 2 villages in Alaska, Newtok and the native village of Nupakiak, top the list. The BIA will spend another $12.7 million next year on managed relocation for tribes in Maine, Louisiana, as well as others in Alaska and Washington. All told, the budget for next year totals $119 million for tribes and community-based projects. And back to Quinault. A second village, Queets, is also in the early stages of a relocation plan. The takeaway here is the scale of what's required across the globe to move people away from danger.
I had the chance to visit Quinault a year ago, and they are doing just amazing work on climate relocation and climate resilience. We provided funding to Quinault almost 2 years ago now, or a year and a half ago. It's one of 3 communities that are going to serve as kind of pilot projects on community-driven relocation. I was really impressed by the foresight in their planning. You know, we shouldn't be surprised that when tribes have resources, they're able to do very impressive things. Not only are they taking the lead here in the United States, they are really serving as leaders in this effort for the world. There aren't a lot of places that are really engaged in this sort of activity right now.
So every one of these houses is full of brackish water underneath them, causing a bunch of mold problems. Walls are being replaced.
But what the tribe is doing at Quinault, what they're doing at Nupakiak and Newtok in Alaska, is they're really on the leading edge of things that we're going to have to think harder about across the globe.
The biggest question may be the scale of what's involved. So many places across the planet where people have lived for generations may no longer be habitable.
On top of that, Mark, there are tribes that are facing impacts from climate change that aren't necessarily going to require them to move entire communities, but they're going to have to spend a lot of money making their communities more resilient, whether it's drought or wildfire or changing ecosystems that change the foods that they eat, or just more severe weather. It's not just relocation, which is expensive enough, but it's also that resilience piece of it. And we're really ramping up our investments there as well. As you know, we just rolled out a $120 million investment at more than 100 locations across the country to help tribes with that resilience piece. Tribes have really been at the leading edge of people in this country feeling the impacts of climate change. And of course, tribes have been warning about this for a long time.
A report by the Natural Resources Defense Council, the NRDC, looked at the risk of flooding and concluded that more communities are in danger. The data was collected from the Federal Emergency Management Agency.
The scale of what we all need to be planning for and thinking about is massive. It is a bigger and more communal problem than many of us have ever thought about before in our lifetimes or for generations. And so even in communities that have put so much thought and effort and planning into relocation, you can still see how hard it is. Most of the data that we have are from non-tribal communities because those are the places that are more likely to have federally backed flood insurance through FEMA, which is where a lot of our data comes from. And looking at those data sets from FEMA, we see that before getting any kind of help to reduce the risk to your repeatedly flooded home, you might flood 3, 4, 5, 10 times before any assistance is available.
And part of the problem is that even after a flood, communities will rebuild using zoning rules that have been around for decades, even though the world is changing.
The actual risk is changing. because of climate change, development patterns, erosion. A place that didn't flood a generation ago might be flooding regularly now. It might be flooding every time there's a high tide. Another reason why areas that have previously been considered low risk are now at higher risk is because our understanding of that risk is just out of date. In a lot of places around the country, FEMA's flood risk maps, which form the basis for our floodplain management decisions, are 5, 10, 15, 20 plus years out of date.
How do communities figure this out? Do we move now, a few years from now, or after a flood?
It just depends on the particular needs and priorities of an individual community. So that's one component, is flexibility. You can't use a cookie cutter program that is going to do the same thing for the lots and lots of different communities who are facing different kinds of risks, who have different cultures, different histories, and are dealing with different landscapes and even types of housing. So programs have to be flexible enough to be able to meet the community's specific needs. Another thing is who's involved in the planning, who's at the table, who gets to make the decisions about when we move, where we move, what the community we move to will look like. These are all questions that communities dealing with the fact of relocation are grappling with.
I was really impressed that they are thinking at Quinault very strategically about how to address these questions. And a lot of the people that I spoke with in the community are being very thoughtful about that, along with community members in places like Newtok and Napakiak. You know, they're not only thinking about themselves and the equities or the equity they've built in their own homes, they're thinking about their kids and their grandkids in the community that they're going to live in future generations. And, you know, this is just another example of when we make investments in tribes and we partner with them and make sure that we're supporting them as leaders on these types of issues, that tribal people come up with really innovative solutions. And so, again, it's exciting to watch what they're doing.